Hello. My name is Nate Rasa, and welcome back to I Just Can't Even With Myself Right Now, my personal pet project podcast where I discuss absolutely anything that comes to mind, because limits are for losers, and in my space, we follow the wind. So sit back, tense up, and enjoy NE Unleashed. And as always, live it up, folks, and make it happen. Alright, welcome back, everybody. So, it has been a while, actually. It's been quite a bit, and I'm actually kind of still, you know that feeling when you get back to work after a long period of just dormancy, like when you're just dormant for weeks, and then you're just trying to realize, so I have to re-feel everything again. That's kind of how I feel right now, where I feel like we're going back into the podcast medium feels like an alien, foreign vibe, but at the same time, it's like, you know what? The answer to some things will have to just to push through and just make it happen, and so that's what I'm gonna do. So, great. Another big thing, of the reason why I'm having trouble with this one is because this is a function that is normally very misunderstood. Yes, and I am talking about a function here. In the realm of personality theory, the function we are going to be discussing is FI, or rather introverted feeling. I'm actually going to be kind of rolling around the definitions here a bit, because the definitions of FI have been highly debated. It's one of the debated ones, like FE has been as well. Frankly, I think it's because there's quite a bit of misunderstandings between feeler types anyway, and about feeler types too. So I'm actually, how do I put this? I'm going to compare and juxtapose a bunch of different definitions, because I've suffered, let's say, maybe 2-3 days of just trying to make sense of this particular function. As an ENFP, this is my auxiliary function, so technically I do have a good handle on it, but it's just being able to express it in a way for it to make sense for other people who don't have this function, for example, who don't value it, who find this foreign, or those who have it as an inferior. Like, it could be kind of odd and take, and it's funny because I actually don't even know how this will kind of go to, but I feel like my goal for this episode is that for people who are FI users out there, will be able to hear this and relate to some extent, or relate to the extent that is correct. Because I have to say that there is quite a bit of misunderstandings about FI. I feel like we as a type community need to understand the main reasons of FI, like the motivations of FI. We need to understand like what makes this tick, what makes it go here and there. So I just kind of want to jump into that and give you guys what you guys want, or at least are expecting from this episode. So first of all, I actually personally, I come from the MBTI side of FI before. A lot of the times, especially in my earlier tweets, I've usually talked about FI as if it were like a membrane, like a muscle, and it waxes and wanes. You can train it, you can also loosen it up. It can also be stuck in its ways, almost, in a sense. FI from an MBTI, understand, at least from how I understood FI in an MBTI sense, was that it is having your personal code of ethics. It's having a personal set of values that is set from arbitrary details that you've personally have shaped, and it kind of makes you kind of very analytical about values in general. You know, it kind of makes you have that kind of when you look at the world through the eyes or the lens of an FI user, you see it in a sense of like individuality versus group harmony, right? And this is all MBTI thing that I'm talking about. I think to some extent, a lot of you guys listening would be able to kind of be like, yeah, he's talking FI. Like it makes sense. FI people know how they feel. A lot of the times sometimes we'll just deny it, but we really know exactly how we're feeling in a lot of situations. We know why we like something or why we don't. Why we understand, yes, it's our subjective preference, but we prioritize it. There's a lot of we like to have our own categories for things for people, and so it can make us come off very stubborn, very, what's the word I'm looking here for? Oh, I had the word, but it was gone at the tip of my tongue. But I'll figure it out. It's gonna kick in at some point. Obstinate, actually, that's the word. Okay, I figured it out. Yeah, we could be a little obstinate, and for the most part, I've been kind of content with that definition. I've content that being an FI user, we're going to have a list of subjective motivations that only really benefit ourselves. And I know people have called out FI for being selfish or too self-absorbed, which is a risk. It's a risk when your whole entire existence kind of focuses on yourself, and self with a capital S. I remember reading something about that where there's FI seeks the self. It's an inward focused function where we take in the information from the outside and we process it within. It's in a sense we share this motion, this direction with all the other introverted functions, SI, NI, and TI. FI is also analytical by default because we spend a lot of time just ruminating in our own values, trying to either strengthen it, weaken it, see where it fits, how it goes. I know with a lot of folks who are introduced into MBTI FI, there is a fascination, a fixation on identity and the idea of authenticity. FI people do not want to do anything that isn't born from within, like from an inner willpower that they have themselves decided upon. If they are told to do something that they don't want to do, it's almost either impossible or just really difficult to get them motivated to do that. I actually have myself used examples of, like in the vehicle setting, FI tends to be like an engine. No matter where it is in your stack, whether it's your dominant or your inferior, like there is a place for FI in you, in your thought process, where you are charged by this backing, like this engine. It's the thing that charges you to do what you need to do. It is also a deciding function. It's a decision-making function as well. And it's basically deciding via preferences. You like this or you don't like this. You make sense of this or you don't make sense of this. And I can say or admit, for myself at least, that it's not the most efficient function, and I actually don't even think it's efficient at all. I think that's why it's backed and has to be supported by TE, because if you are only focusing on FI, it's almost really hard. Like if you have it as isolated in an isolated setting, you're basically asking to waste time, only because it's such a static function. Like it's so still. We have problems taking in making action based off of it, but we will have decisions right away off of something from it. We would refuse to take something like that. We would refuse to associate with a person, for example, based on an FI reason. And I say FI reason because the rules or the whole kind of information, the data that why we made that decision in the first place either tends to be very private or just way too complicated that we ourselves have made it complicated for. And that's why we're in this mess. At the same time, FI people, by definition and also by application, by the people I've met, especially, let's say, INFPs, and as an ENFP, I have to say this, that they often know how I'm feeling before I feel it. And they also just seem to understand and comprehend people's emotions in a very, I wouldn't say it's not empathetic like FE does. Like it's not in an empathetic way like FE does. It's more of a snapshot, like a framed emotion that they're accessing. if that makes sense. The reason why it's so difficult to define FI is I think the definitions of FI in MBTI is actually not that great. There's a lot of misconceptions, I would say, when it comes to the actual, when you put the pieces together and you actually get a type, like the ISFPs and the INFPs. You see them and people have all these stereotypes that these people that aren't actually accurate at all about them. Like ISFPs aren't passive. Like that doesn't make sense to the whole theory. Like when you actually dig down on their functions, none of it actually makes them passive. SE is quite a powerhouse function, and INFPs aren't just this lovely healing person who's always like, oh, we love everybody. Like, no, INFPs actually, they're kind of cold at first hit. There's another one. They don't warm up until you really get to know them. And another one is that INFPs are really easy to hate people. Like, they really know how they feel about how everyone else is around them, so it's very quick for them to decide if they like a person or not. Doesn't really make them inclusive as the theories suggest, or as the stereotypes suggest that they are. So I'm here to have this discussion, open this up to dispel the misconceptions of FI. One, because I want to know how y'all react to this, and at the same time I want to know how we really need to have a hard look on function definitions and on the theories and the systems itself. I was having this conversation with an ENFJ before, and really the premise of a lot of this episode, and I'd like to share this with you guys, is how I feel that as you get to study more about type and as you start digging into the functions deeper and deeper, the critical thinking kind of kicks in and you start to ask questions. You start to not completely adhere to certain aspects. You either start giving yourself a cold hard look at yourself and realize that there are some things that are missing, and if they're missing, what do we need to fill that with? And currently, this is how I'm going to transition this. Currently, the definitions of socionics understanding of FI is at the most, in my opinion, better. And better is very, I would say, still on a neutral, varied thing. Because the reason why I say that is because the descriptions, socionics is a TI-based system. And it was, from what I understood from the people who teach it, it's developed by an INTP, or at least someone who has TI base. And that's what makes FI really hard to define, even in this particular personality system theory, because TI people are role as FI by the system, and that would mean that it's kind of a neutral ground, like is it or is it not kind of function for them. And let's say you're an ENTP, this makes it your polar function, so it's kind of your point of least resistance, so you're gonna have to deal with that kind of moment also. So in a sense, FI, I would argue, in the sociotypes as the most misunderstood function, not fully defined, fleshed out, compared to the rest, because NI has been defined rather clearly in socionics, and I really appreciate that. But moving on, because I can bring up my thoughts, I'm first gonna mention how it's called, or what's the differences, or how the jargon has shifted a little bit. So it's not called introverted feeling, it's called introverted ethics. So they call it FI, the letter R, relational ethics, or white ethics. It's called introverted rational static. It's associated with the ability to sense the subjective or implicit sense of the subjective distance between two people, and they make judgments based off of this distance. Types with valued FI, they like to make and maintain close personal relationships with their friends and their family. They value sensitivity to others' feelings, and occasionally will make their innermost feelings and sentiments known in order to test the possibility of creating closeness with others. These types convey emotions in terms of how they were affected by it, so it's very I did not like that, rather than an FE approach, which would be is very objective to the subject, so it's very like, that sucked or something. Much of their decisions are based on how they themselves, the self or others, is relating to them personally, feel a contrast to considering like the big picture, like in terms socially. Like they don't really look at it in groups, they look at it as individuals. So already, this is by the way taken from sociotype.com, so for any of you guys who want to check this out on your own time, it's sociotype.com. And I only brought this up because this is a very kind of quick paragraph description on introverted ethics, or FI. And I have to say, with this description, the whole point that from where I was trying to get into socionics at the first time was find it difficult to understand was distance. And I didn't really fully understand what they meant with that until I finally fully fleshed it out. It's not distance like how we understand distance, I don't think. It's not like quantifiable by like how many meters or how many feet you're away from a person. It's not like that. You're thinking it's all subjective, and that's why I say that, because FI is a subjective function, unlike FE, which we've collectively understood as objective, where back in Jungian terms it's, we're focused on the object. FI is not. It's focused on the self. It's focused on how they personally perceive something. So my previous understanding of FI with the whole arbitrary set of rules and the connectivityness of yourself in relation to an object is the distance that we're talking about here. Making judgments based off distances. So what this usually comes off as is like how I talked about how INFPs would like know, how they feel about something. They know if one thing equals what, or if one person rubs them the wrong way, they're not going to hesitate in knowing that status of their relationship. It's almost instant. They almost kind of get this vibe where it's quick, like they don't like this person. They feel as though their existence directly serves as a compass when it comes to gauging out people's like safeness or capacity of taking on like it's almost like it's really interesting when you actually see it in action. And the best way to just find that, or to kind of play with FI in action, is using for actually ISFPs. Actually, ISFPs are the best, I would say is my kind of next best thing to take in. So what are, how does an FI with SE work, or an ESI or whatever, and what is FI like for them? So according to a good person that I've met, her name is Katie. She's an ISFP. I feel like you guys who are listening must have already known her. If not, you can totally hit her up. She's awesome. So with her and SE, it's kind of like a bulldozer kind of effect, like a hammer, how it happens. So what it is, and why I say that, is so one, she knows exactly how she feels about a person right away, and SE, the second function, kicks in, and suddenly they know how to act accordingly to what needs to be done. So one way is how she's actually, I love it because I actually have her comment on this. She'll ask herself, if she loves this person, are they neutral to this person? Do I dislike this person? Do we mesh well, or is there something I disagree with? And when that happens, it's either, and they say balls to the wall, passionate about it, or they don't give at all. There's no middle ground. So FI helps them gauge the distance, and then SE kind of lets them know if they need to, she calls it, SE is a tool, reality is her playground. So they find practical and realistic means for expression, whether it means they feel something about a friend and they'll instantly know what to buy them, or what to write for them, or what to say to them, or how to act for them. They know how to craft reality in order to serve that FI base, to serve whatever they're feeling. They know what they need to do to mold reality to what they want. So for someone to mold reality, and this kind of brings me back to the SE thing, it takes quite a character. It takes quite a persona. They're powerful people by default, in a sense. Unlike sure, they have inferior TE, where it makes it kind of difficult for them to like think, let's say, of the efficiency, but because they're SE second, it gives them that extra advantage where at least they'll just act on it. They'll instantly make it, they can power through problems let's say between them and another person, whatever distances they have with another person, they're quick to speak up. They're not really one to kind of cower or retreat. I really don't see ISFPs doing that at all. They're really not that kind of person. So it's very fascinating with that. Whereas when I interviewed an INFP, when I asked them about FI and NE, for them, FI and NE was like FI is the child, NE is the trampoline. So it's almost like what it is like they idealize their partner in a sense. They imagine what they want from the world. So like FISI, how my good friend Joey said, like FISI is like the personification of an inner child. And yeah, they use a trampoline to try to like think of them. They're not as grounded per se. He did mention too, FI is basically awareness. Basically just attunement, like you're just attuned to knowing where you stand with people. FI people just know. At least FI DOMs, from what I've experienced, they just know. I actually have to make an argument for this. Even ENTJs and INTJs, they have an innate kind of sense of where they stand with people. They may not be able to explain it, like neither of us FI users, I guess, just generally explain why we don't like a person. Only that when we don't like a person and we've kept our distances between us and them, we're better off. There's always been, like, when we erect walls, it's not to protect like ourselves, like it's not that selfish, it's like protect each other from, like, it's almost harmony by a backwards sense of harmony, because by keeping distance is what we keep harmony and peace between us, because too much closeness and it's gonna get like so it's interesting, it's very, very interesting to get it. And so I've been simmering this topic for quite a while because I'm just trying to figure out where even I stand with the definitions of FI in this case. And another thing that came up to my mind was the topic of identity is so easy, I would say, for FI dominance or FI base, but it's difficult for people who are FI auxiliary. And in socionics, they have this explanation where, because they call it the creative function, and it's under the topic or under the theory concept of dimensionality. So your 4D is the air you breathe, so it's your dominant. 3D is your playground. You're good at it, you're good at it, but it's not the air you breathe, so you have to think of creative ways to use it. It's kind of how I've wrapped my mind around this theory. So in my case, it's NE is my 4D, so I breathe NE, but FI is my 3D. So what that means is my standing with people, my distances that I have with people, they're a lot more fluid. My identity, in my opinion, is more fluid. And I remember there was this poll that a good friend of mine too, like Joanna, who's an INFJ, has mentioned has brought up, where the topic of identity, like, is it static to you, is it not, or is it more fluid? And I answered that it was more fluid, and that I don't believe that we have a very strict sense of identity that doesn't change. I feel like it meshes and waxes and wanes and transforms into whatever we need it to be. And it did kind of rile up a few FI DOMs, actually, in this case, because they see it completely different. To them, the FI is so strong, it is static. It just doesn't change unless they themselves will it to be. And for me, my FI, I keep things a little more open-ended than anything. It's also backed by the fact that my TE is also a little bit higher, that I instantly seek a practical application right away. So how does this blend in with all this theory? It was that my FI is, in socionics, from how I've understood this, is always weighing my distances between people. I'm weighing where I stand with everybody, and weighing how that individual works with this individual. No, how I work with that individual versus how I work with another individual. It's totally not like FE at all. Like for FE, it's always seeking like a harmony of some kind, like of an objective result of some kind. For me, it's not the case. It's seeking out how I can gain something from this interaction. We can evolve our status from here, but when I go to another person, I'm not doing the same thing. It's a whole different person, a whole new identity is going to sprout. It's a whole new interaction. It's I'm not going to just do a one-size-fits-all for that kind of situation. It's just not going to happen. And what ends up happening in that case is I have, let's say, a lot of social networks, like a lot of people I've met, but I've kept them all within varying levels and degrees of importance. And when I make decisions based that will affect people around me, it's weighed under this scale of how prioritized this person is to me. And to some extent, we understand that. Like, for example, we typically would put like your parents above certain people. You'd put your close friends above certain, they get to enjoy privileges that your other people don't, which I think is not necessarily FI. Like, I feel like everybody does that to some extent, because not everyone is your friend. You don't go online and assume everybody you talk to is suddenly your best friend. That's incorrect. But at the same time, when you're starting to make decisions based on this kind of thought process, I feel is very 3D FI in this case, or my creative FI. It's like how I see the distances between people. I don't see them as literal voids. I see them as strings. And why I say strings is the metaphor I'm going to start using is the string is that I pull them one by one. I pull and test and see if any of these relationships are going to do anything. I'm going to parallel this because with functions like FE and TI axis, because with those functions, it's I had to ask the question, as I and IEE/ENFP, how am I adept in social settings, yet have a completely different set of functions? Like, how do my functions accommodate for the networking concept? And it's got me thinking that for me to get along with everybody and try to accommodate my existence with everybody else's existence, it's tailored so keenly to individual people. It's every person has experienced a different side of me, because I tailor each person for my benefit, not for them, especially like not for them exclusively. It's inclusively for both of us are being tailored for this specific connection I have with that person. And then when you have another one with another person, it's completely different again. We're not FE users, we don't just create a force field where everyone in the force field benefits. It doesn't work like that. A good friend of mine, Max, has mentioned that, like, if you feel like you don't want to be in order to get along with a person, you create this distance. And I said yes, because the status of that distance I've had with this person is absolutely necessary. Because in the end, I'm just the one adjusting, not them. I'm giving a piece of myself, and it costs me to shorten that distance. If a person messes me up or messes up and I'm affected by that, the price that I paid to connect with this person doesn't come back to me right away. I don't just bounce back to a state where we're back to normal again after a few talks or something. We're not FE users. Our reaction to said action is going to stick with us until we've done something about it. Personally done something about it. So because those are the issues I deal with as an FI user, I gotta play with the strings. I have to see the degrees of the social connection. I gotta know that the investments I'm dropping here and there aren't just gonna fail. I compared it to like an investor who gambles, almost. Like, this is just like a playground for me. And I'm just also wondering if this is like FI and TE being much closer, that I see this in a more like detached, disconnected setting, which is what makes it kind of awkward to talk about. Because you can't really observe FI in action. Like, it's really hard unless you're like a, FI with SE backed with it. But at the same, another thing too is like your motivations, all these little play things, is not obvious to anyone, except for myself and if I'm talking about it. So it becomes that kind of issue. While FI is static as a definition and as a function by isolation, as in any base or any DOM, that FI is creative, therefore, or auxiliary, therefore it's fluid, so it's a lot less likely, it's more adaptable for me, for other ENFPs. I remembered one way I can actually connect this as well is I was talking to a good friend, Crystal, who's also an ENFP, and we've talked about, she used the words, giving a piece of your soul to each person you meet. And a piece of your soul is interesting to point it out because by inserting a piece of yourself, it's not like, it's almost like you've created a specific set of yourself for this person, and then you leave and go to the next person, you do this again. So what you ended up happening is, let's say you've created 1,000 contacts or 1,000 networks with each individual, so you've given 1,000 pieces of you. This is what makes it exhausting for us, because the entire function itself is exhausting. Like, this is a very time-consuming function. You don't just, like, give it freely and willingly. You either generate a few bits and then you give it away a little bit more. And then why the distance is so important, because you can't just give everything away now. You realize that your resources as a self is not infinite, it's finite. You don't have a lot of this. I can already imagine ENTJs and INTJs are going to agree with a little bit of this statement, because they don't have a lot to give to people. They're busy trying to make stuff happen the best way they could, or the most efficient way they can, or the most applicated thing to make life a little bit easier for everybody else. But to sit there and, like, let's say, deal with the FE of the matter, it's not going to be a simple give and take. It's a lot more subjective and a lot more nuanced, and it's complicated. Especially if you're an FI user, it's not going to work. And I remember I was explaining this to Max, and I was like, I feel a little heartless explaining this, because it sounds like, what kind of human being does this? Like, FI users sound really weird. And for the most part, I would agree. We do tend to come off a little weird. But it's this thought process that we're going through, playing in our heads, pushing and pulling and seeing where we stand with everybody, is what collectively, arguably, at least from an FI perspective, how we've maintained our sanity for the most part in our lives. I mean, people have called us out as, like, heartless and cold, and like, because, like, we don't entertain just about everybody. And the reason why we don't is because FI is a very limited function. It's limited to the self. And benefits of FIs, frankly, we are so in tune and aware of what we are lacking. And lacking in a sense, not like in a Enneagram 4 sense of lacking. We're again thinking distance. We know what needs to be done to either fill or not fill, and we're not going to just give ourselves so quickly to a person, just willy-nilly, And I know this could be contradictory, because I know some ENFPs are so willing to give, but that's a price we pay by accident, by not realizing our FI enough, or the strength of this FI, or like the whole point of our function, why we think like this. It costs us something, and I think it directly contributes to ENFPs, or maybe even ESFPs, suffering by accidentally not realizing that we need to take time for ourselves. If we don't do that, it kind of affects us negatively. We actually, like, if we don't know our statuses, or we don't have a more concrete way of looking at of our deciding where we are with this person, that we become way more willy-nilly, like way more wishy-washy than we intend to be, and the damage is between not just you, the individual, but the person that you're interacting with suffers as well. I've heard way too many sob stories, like really unfortunate instances where people complain about EFPs who've done them bad because they weren't aware of what they needed to do. And so it's kind of like, without the TI also to just like explain why they do the way they do, other than the fact that you're just rolling with the punches, rolling with the tides, the wind, not realizing their impact is affecting themselves and others. It's hard. It's a tough function to, like, you can't just ignore it. At least I've tried as a 7 in the Enneagram system. I've tried ignoring it. It's not a fun function, but it has served its many good deals of success. One weird thing about my FI, at least with mine, I don't know about other ENFPs or INFPs, ISFPs, ESFPs. If you guys relate, please let me know. But when I don't like a person and I share this with people, that I'm like, oh, I don't know about this person. This person is giving me bad vibes. I'm getting a terrible vibe. The distance between us, I want to keep this distance. I don't want to get close to this person for so and so arbitrary reasons. Whether it's weeks, days, months, or whatever, the result always turns out that I would be right. It's the only function I would say that I've had complete right, like being correct with, and it's freaking me out because I don't know how I do that. I don't know the process. Only that I'm picking up on these subtle cues from another person and collecting this information and processing it and suddenly deciding whether or not this person is worth it. Worth is a big thing for us FI users. When something is worth doing, we almost either have all the energy suddenly in the world to accomplish it, or we don't. We weigh. It always is a weighing going on. Unlike FE, which is where we understood this as looking and seeing our FE impact and consequence and implications that our actions and our words have on another person, we are looking at how another person as an individual costs us personally to interact with them, what price we pay to maintain a connection, what price we pay to maintain a distance even. Sometimes we try to be objective enough by just completely disconnecting from the situation, and yeah, it happens. And then other times we just realize that probably this is not a good idea and we're just going to hold off a bit and wait. I've noticed with at least INFPs, like there's the time where it takes so long for them to come to a decision because they know what they want. They just can't really create the pathway for them to make it. But at the same time, like for example myself, it may take me forever to know what I want. And then they'll just know. They'll be like, no, Nate, you actually want this, or you don't actually like this person, or you are not going to get along. It's almost very clear for them. So I have to say, with this episode, as I have babbled about FI, I hope that this opens a conversation. I don't know, I'm putting myself out there with this kind of information and seeing how other people are going to react to this definition of FI. And I just hope that I can bring a little more realism to something that's not typically understood well. I think that, yes, there is value in FI. I'm not saying that just because I'm a TE user, obviously not. But I also think that we need to get we have to kind of crack down on our understanding of the functions, because when you really look at this understanding of FI, we're not looking at you're not looking at a type of person who's just all feely by themselves. This is a person who thinks really deeply about their standing with other people, their status, their that's not, I keep saying status, it's not status like a political sense, it's like the state, the condition of your relationship with another person. And I keep saying person, it's not mass. When you try to do this to a group of people, I fail. It doesn't work. And that's because I'm not an FE user. The methods, the process, the thought strategy of FI is not designed for FE. It's not designed for a collective, objective result. It's always shaped to be subjective and personalized, and like the energy is inward. Always. It's always going in. I remember there's another issue with like one of the biggest issues sometimes is like FE and FI people not getting along. And they're not getting along because either they're misreading each other, or they're just unaware of the other impact. Because again, they're not the same. They're two distinct styles of ethics. And it's like, think of it like as two opposing houses or schools of thought. They have this life perception projecting onto the world, but they're completely opposite from each other. So when they interact, it's like two completely different planets attempting to try to wrap their minds around what they've already understood the entire planet to be running as. So it's definitely an eye-opener. It's definitely a reality kicker, or checker, when you interact with your opposing feeling ethical function. Of course, it gets a little bit more blended in the socionic system, because as ENFPs go, or ESFPs even, we have 4D FE, so we're actually very aware of the FE impact. We just don't really care to kind of enact it. Because I would say I'm actually pretty good at enacting the objective vibe, the objective mood of the room and trying to make it happen, but it's not sustainable for me. I would trade that in favor of my valued function, which is FI. This is the place I play in, even though technically when you think about it, my FE would be easy to just do, but because I prefer FI, I would just play around with it, even though it probably costs me to waste more time than necessary. So definitely more on this later in life. I want to open this conversation first. I want you guys to get in on this and, scrutinize, criticize however you want. If you're from the socionic place, speak up. If you're from the MBTI world, speak up. Let's get this going. And if not, I hope you guys enjoyed this little episode of me babbling. I think it's fun. I personally thought it's quite fun. It's not as, I would say, lively like my NE one, frankly, because NE is my air, so it's why it's like that. But it took me a while with FI. I hope with as much as I can of the hoping thing that I've explained this to, or given it some kind of clarity. And if not, I would love to create another episode again and go into this a little bit more deeper, because I think it's very beneficial for us to get in on this, and not so much as you don't have to adhere to the concept as if blindly. You get in on this to criticize it, to learn. You get on this to pull apart and be like, hey, do I actually think like that? Do I actually send a piece of myself to everybody around me, and not really look at things like a group setting? Is that actually a thing? Do I think about that too much? Do I not think about it? Am I analytical by default? How does that work? It's all like that in a bag of chips. So till next time, everybody, I thank you so much for listening and hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.